Hey there, my name is Meredith White, and I teach Spanish 1 and 2 just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in Gwinnett County Schools. When I reflect on last year, 2020, 2021, as a school year, there are a lot of pieces, a lot of like moving pieces, a lot of things at play, a lot of variables. And one of the biggest ones that I come back to is, but now what, right? Like, now what are we doing? Because I felt like we asked ourselves all year, what are we doing? And then when our districts changed our mind, or our schools, or anything that we're kind of working, any kind of system that we're working within, it was like, well, now what? Now what do we do? Now what am I supposed to do? And now I am reflecting in very similar ways, like, now what do we do? Now what am I supposed to do? So what have we learned that we really can't go back from? What are some of those core values that we are perpetuating, and possibly in ways that aren't great for our students and for colleagues? What are the lessons that we're taking out of this? And what are some ways that we can continue reflecting and continue to transform our teaching in positive ways, but that also are sustainable? Because if you're like me, as I said, and as it says up there, I teach in Gwinnett County Public Schools. I work in a very large district, in a large department, in a large school. So everything is like big, big, big. And that's always the scale that I am operating from. That is my perspective. That is my experience for most of the places where I've taught. And that means that there are a lot of people at the table, which is a great thing, and also can be a challenging thing. So it's great and challenging at the same time. And so that means that rubrics and assignments and grade weights and all of these things that really make a big difference in our teaching have some baggage. And so really, we're going to kind of break down some of those things and reflect and dissect and work on changing what we can, when we can, as much as we can. And then we just keep doing that, right? So all of these slides, everything that you see, can be found here at bit.ly/Roomies, Zoomies, where. And the R is big, the Z is big, and the W is big as well. So let's get started. When I look at how we've evolved in this space, you have to look at the 2019, 2020 school year. And I started out, and I think many of us did, with high hopes. And it was fine. It was what it needed to be. But it was a lot, and definitely an unexpected ending. This past year, I made some gift stickers, and I found that some of these gift stickers that I could send to students actually represented this journey really well. So we started out 2019 like, woohoo, guys, it's going to be great, right? We're going to do awesome things. And we did. I'm not hating on 2020 school year. But as we slowly evolved, and I'm going to move my face here, right? I'm going to go up here. Suddenly 2019, 2020 ended, and it was like, where's all the work? Where are my students? What just happened? To be fair, I only send the Muy Bien sticker to students. I don't send these other ones. This is just for teacher humor. But suddenly everything dropped off, the map in a lot of ways. It was like, goodbye students, goodbye work, goodbye everything. We all thought we'd be out for a couple of weeks, and it turned out it was the next year plus for many people. Students continued to email in the subject line, right? If your students are like mine, I swear, some of them, and they're like important. I'm going to try and keep moving my face to get out of the way. But like, they'd be important emails. Hey, just checking my grade. Did you grade that quiz yet? No name anywhere to be found, just in the subject line. That was it. And then the email address didn't have the name either. It was just like, Batman 47. And you're like, okay, this is not helpful. Batman, your email cut off because it's all in the subject line. Also, there is no Batman on my roster. Help me out here, kiddo. So that was frustrating for all involved, right? Parents are trying to track down everything that's going on, or guardians as well, I should say. Adults in our students' lives are trying to figure out like what's what, and the right arm's trying to figure out what the left arm's doing. Meanwhile, our schools are all like, sort of about face and figuring out what the technology situation is, what we can actually do, what we can actually afford. And it was just a lot. And we've ended up somewhere here where, in the third sticker, there's some wine involved. And in the last sticker, it's like, oh, how are some of these things still issues, right? And this is jokingly aimed at students, but we can also take some of these things and put them in the context of colleagues, right? It's a literal pandemic. a global pandemic where students and teachers and adults and just humans and just everyone involved are pretty much working in the most different and complicated and difficult ways probably ever for many. And yet you still have colleagues that are like, nope, I take off 1 point for every millisecond of late work. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But, these are also some of these things that we need to push back on. I'm joking here that students are still submitting blank assignments or just like fully blank documents and slideshows and whatever. And it's not many, but it's like a couple where you're going, we've been doing computer school for a year. How are you still? But you know what? We work with them and we're patient. That's why we're teachers. But when we push back in ways like this against colleagues, that can sometimes get a little ugly. And I think we need to still do that. I think we need to continue. I think it's important that we continue doing that and that we continue disrupting that status quo of a point off for every millisecond of late work. I mean, that's exaggerated, but some people's penalty literally comes down to a really similar metric. For every this, it's a letter grade. And for every, what we're learning from this experience is a lot of people were more productive from home or from school or from a combo. And it turns out what every teacher hopefully has known to some degree forever is that there is so much more nuance to teaching and learning than we really allow ourselves to get caught up in. Because I think if we really acknowledged how hard it is to do what we do, we'd just be like overwhelmed and overcome. So a lot of these we can laugh about, but what are those deeper sort of underlying causes and effects and intentions and impacts and all of those kind of things that have really affected and influenced a lot of the decisions on a daily kind of micro level and on an overall macro level in, again, the systems in which we work every day. So I've got 4 guiding questions here. The first question is, what are my core beliefs? What are the things that I, as a teacher and as a language teacher, believe wholly and fully that affect how I comport myself, how I grade, how I plan, how I go about my day, how I interact with students, how I interact with colleagues, or don't? What are these things that quite literally are at our core and kind of emanate out from us? So these are a few of mine. I've learned this year that it's okay if my class is easy. We've made easy a naughty word, just in like life, shortcuts and cheating. And it's like anything that makes anything easier, we have to like, put a bad spin on or a connotation. But this year, really the key for some of my students was, and they voiced this, that Spanish was easy. Because easy makes it a little bit easier to fun, right? Easy is the gateway drug to fun. It's like, oh, are you kidding me? Like I can guaranteed get like an A or a B in this class and I'm going to enjoy it. Well, this is awesome. Who's not in for that? How many times do we read articles about quick fixes and what's the word that's always in there? 5 easy steps. I think we've done a couple things with easy. Again, we've villainized it, but we've also made it, what's the word I'm looking for? Synonymous with simple. And I see easy and simple as very, very different concepts. I think something can be easy and complicated. I also think something can be simple enough, but difficult. And so I think when we look at easy, we have to look at how transparent we're being with our students and with our colleagues and with their stakeholders for students, their guardians, and just kind of everyone involved. It's okay if most of our students get an A. It's okay if none of our students fail. In fact, I would be more hard pressed to find a reason for our students to fail. As John Bracey says, like, why are students failing language if they've done work and tried their best? Obviously our students who just like don't do anything, few and far between for me, but they're there. I mean, they exist, right? It's human. It's a human experience just to, just to have a period of time where just something is not happening. And for some students, that's school and our class. And so I think it's okay if we make it easy. I just really, really do. And like I said, this year with students being so stressed and so pressed and so many teachers having really appropriate expectations and others having really inappropriate expectations, the saving grace for a lot of my students was that they knew Spanish was going to be easy and simple and straightforward. And, we were going to get in and out, do what we needed to do, and then they could go on to something else and, continue on with their life. I think the mindset that comes with that is about expectations. We've made lazy a bad word, just like we've made easy a bad word. So if you're saying, "Oh, I'm being kind of lazy today," we apologize for that in so many ways. We're kind of having a lazy day at home, and we do this like cringe thing with our face, like, because we have prioritized productivity above everything else, and that needs to make a shift. One of my favorite authors, the author of, and now I can't think of her first name. Dalton is her last name. But she writes The Joy of Missing Out. And she talks about productivity isn't always doing everything. It's doing the right things. So sometimes the right thing is being lazy and just doing nothing. The plan today is to have no plan. Great plan for a weekend, great plan for a break from school. Adjusting our expectations doesn't mean we've lowered our standards. It just means we've adjusted our expectations. You can have high standards for yourself and still have a lazy day, or take a rubric down a notch, or give students an extension, or give colleagues a little bit more grace and make some, extra copies for somebody, or help cover somebody's class if they're running late. Life happens and things happen. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that we're being lazy per se. And if we are, that's not the worst thing either. Along those same lines, if we're gauging, or if we are measuring our own personal, I'm going to move my face over here again. If we're measuring our own personal self-worth based on how much work our students are doing this year, I would have felt about this big, because that is really unfair for the amount of emotional and just labor intensive and all of the work that we put in for students and for colleagues and just for the greater good of education, because that's our job, is really kind of insulted by us letting ourselves let student engagement define how we feel about ourselves as professionals. Obviously, it can and it should inform our teaching and how we're adjusting and reflecting. But if I decided in my bones, like how I felt about myself as a teacher based on how my students were engaging this year, like I said, I would feel about this big, first of all. And also, it would be really inconsistent, and it would be really like hit or miss, because our students are humans, just like we are humans. So it's just a really hard thing to do. And nevertheless, our brain like lets us go to that place of like, oh, no one's doing this assignment. Come on. Like and it lets us get frustrated. We've all been there, both digitally, but also in the moment. How many times have you just like suddenly graded something like that's it? And now we're, taking up an assignment we had no intention of grading because the students decided that it wasn't worth their time, when really, they're just like gossiping over the fight that happened at lunch or what so-and-so posted on Snapchat. Like, the stories we tell ourselves in terms of our own self-worth as teachers are really, really dangerous. And student engagement, again, should inform us. But if we can feel good about what we're doing, and that's, part of that kind of informing and how we're feeling about our professional experience and presence as a whole. If you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and know that you really, truly are doing the best you can for students and for yourself and for your family and for all those things, you're going to be hard pressed to find a better, more effective way of reflecting in that way, I think, in terms of your self-worth. And I just think this year has done a number on our confidence in that way. And so I'm really actively working on myself to like separate those. And I think that's always going to be a work in progress for me. For some students, our classes, just like those video modules that they give us at the beginning of the school year, right? Like all of the HR videos that we have to go through and watch and do the questions. For some students, that's our class. And that's our class every day, possibly, for many of them. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. But, it is what it is. When we learn our students and we get our relationships really solid as best we can, as best as they allow us, and vice versa, and we're able to gauge what our students really want from our experience as language teachers, their goals, our goals for them, how all of this makes sense, the benefits, the experience of acquiring a language. And if they're still going, yeah, I think I'm okay. I'm just going to do my 2 years and, graduate. But thanks though. Well, that's all we can do, right? That would have been me in many other classes. Thanks. I found this interesting. I think you're great, but I don't really see a future necessarily in this particular content in depth in my life, and there you go. And that's okay. I have mentioned this before in several different arenas, but really, really one tiniest of tiny silver linings from last year was I really succeeded finally in keeping my to-don't list longer than my to-do list. Usually all the things I want to do and try and experiment and collaborate on just really are too much. And I get my creative eyes get bigger than my stomach, like that saying, when you overeat, like I get really excited about things and I need to shelve them first and then decide later if I have the time, the energy, the bandwidth, and just if I feel like it. It's like agreeing to making plans when you're in a really great mood. And then later when the plans come up and you're like, oh, we shouldn't have said we were going to that thing. It's kind of similar to that. Are we committing to too many things, or are we giving ourselves permission to just go, yeah, no, I love that. I love that idea for you, but no thanks. And like moving along. I think that can be really empowering. And I wish that at an earlier point in my career, I had kind of embraced that. That would have made things a little bit easier. Some word nerd action here. The word curate actually comes from, according to my research, hopefully I'm not wrong, the word for in Latin to care. So when we're curating these learning experiences for students, are we caring for them? And are we caring for them as students in our class or just as humans in our presence, right? Those things live, I shouldn't say or, and. As students in our class and humans in our presence and in our life experience. What are we curating? What kind of experience are we curating for students and for ourselves? Also for our colleagues. Are we being collaborative? Are we modeling behaviors we'd like to see? Or are we just kind of closing our door, minding our own business, and maybe not being as forthcoming or open? There's a time and a place for all sorts of actions depending on how it's affecting us. But really, the more we can avoid that second scenario, I think the better. So how are we kind of curating things for our students? How are we caring for the people around us? And another word nerd little tidbit here, the word priority, which I mentioned earlier, I think, has been a word for a while. It's been a word for like 400 or 500 years, but only in the last 100 years have we ever seen the word priorities. That was like not a thing before about 100 years ago. So in the early 20th century, we decided that we can have more than one priority, more than one number one, but we know that we can't. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we can't and that we shouldn't. And that our priorities are allowed, or our one priority is allowed to change every day or by different times of the day, right? You can say, I need to leave at 3 today. So my priority today is my family. Tomorrow, maybe I'll stay till 5:30 because I know that, my family's taken care of, or such and such errands are getting done, like whatever's happening. So today my priority is catching up on grading. I think those things can all mutually exist in the same spaces and should. I don't know where we get the mindset. I think it just comes from, again, wanting to do all of the things. Productivity being defined as doing the most things, not doing the right things. I think we get caught up in wanting to prioritize everything. And then when we can't, naturally, that gets a little bit blurry. And I start to feel badly about myself. Like, I want to do it all. Just because I can do anything doesn't mean I need to do everything. And that's really a journey for me to internalize for sure. And as my dear friend Myra Canyon reminds me often, for better or for worse, I think it's mostly for better, right? Or should I say for easy and for difficult, right? We cannot forget the we in world language. Notice that it literally starts and ends with W-E, we. We are stronger than we are. We are stronger together than we are apart. And we've got these great professional learning networks. We've got organizations full of volunteers that are working really hard to keep things accessible and equitable and affordable, and just like so many ways to grow and collaborate as a teacher. We can't do it alone. So if we are just closing our door, like I said before, and minding our own business, I think it's really important to reflect on why and who is that helping? Who is that harming? And what's the plan long term? That's really, really hard to do, hard to sustain for an entire career, just kind of doing it on your own. So is that what we want out of what we're doing? And if not, if so, and if not, what are we doing to grow? What are we doing to change things that we want to change and continue doing things we want to continue doing? So those are my core beliefs. We also plan and grade and conduct ourselves based on what we value. So what we value as a profession are, as one example, here in the core practices, these are the actual core practices. So the standards and the CanDo statements all are reflected in these core practices. And these are just 6 really high leverage things that we can do, that we can keep in mind and incorporate into our teaching as often and as constantly as possible, that keep us moving our goals forward. If your goal is that students take AP or get the seal of biliteracy, or get a job doing the thing, if there's like business or medical or culinary language tracks in your school, that they get employed and that they continue doing what they were on that track for. Whatever your goal is for your students and for yourself and for your language programs, how are we using the 6 core practices to inform our teaching and to inform how we, again, grade, plan, give students feedback, teach just methodologically, grammar, for example. Like how are these priorities, how are these values that affect, again, standards and CanDo statements and all the trickle down things, how are these high leverage mindsets, practices affecting how we teach and how we collaborate, and then what we create and what we purchase? I mean, literally everything, right? We could list out all the different ways. For me, a couple of ways that this has taken shape is really valuing, as I look at proficiency and proficiency-based teaching, looking at function over form, not teaching students a grammar concept and then we practice using it, right? Using it first, then highlighting some patterns, but keeping in mind that patterns are for teaching, right? Maybe not learning necessarily, depends. Keeping in mind some patterns, keeping in mind some sort of rules, quote unquote, whatever can help students, navigate certain aspects of language and remember certain parts. Looking at the use first has been really key for me, not just like, now we're going to do this kind of verbs, then using it, kind of flipping that script. It also helps me focus on the what over the how. The how is important, okay? So like form and how here are not unimportant, but when my students are focused on what they want to say and not just how to say it, they are more successful and they're able to produce more language and feel better about that language that they're producing, because they're going like, ooh, okay, I could tell you about the time that, if we're talking family and celebrations or circle of care and celebrations, who are the people, what happened, you want students to go, I could tell you about the time that I fell down the stairs at my birthday party and I was, oh, Senora, how do you say embarrassed? Like now they're thinking about what they're going to say, not just, okay, I need to use 10 forms of to be, 3 verbs in the preterite, like not just how to say it. They're excited about the content and they're excited about the cultural comparisons and all of those kind of things. Instead of just like, how much, how do I say this? How do I, they get overwhelmed with the task itself sometimes. Along with the function and the form and the what and the how, getting my students to use language first before they practice it first. That's not how I was taught to teach. I was taught like, you practice these verb forms and then you can use them in context. Then you write and speak with them. But really, says who? When we look at second language, a lot of second language acquisition theory from a lot of different theorists and different linguists, it's really counterintuitive to think that they need to like practice something before they use it for many students. Also, especially looking at this year, after we've had students who literally haven't been in a school building in a year and a half, and they're going to come back in the fall, some of them as sophomores in high school who have never stepped foot in their high school. We're really going to have to focus on leveling up and not catching up. I think we're really going to have to be careful about the if you want to call sort of like deficit mindset type of language that we might not realize we're saying, even if it's just as simple as, well, normally you would have learned this last year in level 2, but in level 3, like even that is like a would have, should have, could have kind of mindset. And students might not consciously be doing it, but somewhere in their brain, they could be thinking, did I not learn as much as I was supposed to? Whatever supposed to even means, first of all. But also if students relied heavily on Google Translate the previous year, we don't need to remind them that they need to be self-conscious about the language that they did or did not acquire. They know exactly what they've done. And listen, if that's the way they needed to get through it, okay, fine, whatever. But like, they're already going to struggle. They're already fully aware. It's like a family member you haven't seen in years going, gosh, Meredith, you've really put on weight. As if I don't wear and purchase and, hang and fold my own clothes that are now 2 sizes bigger. Like, I'm aware of that. And it's kind of the same thing. I see, that's kind of an everyday example, but that's the best comparison in my head of like reminding them that last year was hard and that they might not have learned everything they're supposed to. We know. So let's just keep doing what we've always done, which is know that our students are coming to us with a range of abilities, a range of knowledge, and obviously a range of motivations too. So we just meet them where they are, which is quite literally in our classroom, and focus on leveling up instead of catching up. I think that's going to be a really healthy mindset. And it takes the pressure off both teachers and students and colleagues, instead of trying to get where we somehow used to think they were supposed to be. Lastly, another thing that has really helped me prioritize proficiency over all things is looking at learning order over teaching order. So again, we were taught to teach, especially if you were taught from a book and then you were taught to teach from a book. We go unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, we go in order, and that can make it really hard for us to conceptualize getting out of order and doing things in an order that make more sense, according to, again, second language acquisition, according to first language acquisition, as well as just, our students' experience and our experience with them. So if it makes more sense to talk about and to incorporate X topic after you've done Y topic, great. But if Y before X makes sense too, great also. As long as it's not off the table as a possibility, I think that's really healthy. We've got to look at how they learn, what they want to learn, what we want to teach, and how everything can really set our students up for success, even if that means being easier, rather than being stuck to some scripted teaching order that we think we're supposed to adhere to. I think is really healthy. These are some of my favorite examples because I also am a big believer in our mindset affecting how we teach toward proficiency. I would have loved to have seen some of these this year, but I didn't. All I saw from a lot of students was beautiful, amazing Spanish because they were Google translating a lot of it. And again, more power to them. It is what it is. We're moving right along. But I would have loved to have seen some of these errors. And I use the word error like lightly because we know that's, we know you don't say soy es rubio. But, they do, and they're learning. And so how are we validating that? How are we deciding, as it says above me here, how are we deciding if this is a highlight or a blooper? And who gets to decide? Are we deciding on a team how we're rewarding risk-taking? How we're saying, like, good for you, you tried a new thing? Or are we doing the sort of archaic and I'll say it, unfair, and I think unprofessional thing of just nitpicking every single little thing. So deciding instead of how we're rewarding risks, deciding as a team, like how many points we're taking off for certain mistakes. That to me is exhausting. And again, incredibly insulting to students who are making themselves vulnerable. As professionals, we know how vulnerable we've had to make ourselves. So all of that, we know what language teaching entails, and we know the risks, and we know the silliness you can feel, and sometimes the humor, and sometimes you're the butt of the joke, and then you feel validated because you say something beautifully or someone compliments your accent. Like, learning a language is a full range of emotions. And so when our students are trying different things and we say, ooh, -1, -1, -1, we really have to reflect on what the reaction is that we're hoping to elicit, because the science behind corrective feedback is not great and really doesn't support giving a lot of it until students are ready for it. And some just never are. They're like, I'm good. I'm understandable, right? Cool. Because that's me and my French. I'm like, don't tell me the rule. I can't, I'm not even listening because you knew what I asked. Great. Like, I feel great about that. That for me is good enough. And again, we've made great sometimes the enemy of good enough. And we have assumed in a lot of ways that our students are as perfectionist as some of us are as teachers. And I think that's unfair. So these are some errors that my students make every year. And I'm like, okay, well, I get to decide, right? Is this the highlight reel or is this a blooper? Are we rewarding that last one he's trying to say, I'm light complexioned, like my mom is? Incredible, right? Are we rewarding that risk, or are we saying, ooh, it's not Gusta, it would be Como -2? Because you know what that makes that student most likely want to do? Not try to say any more things. And then we get the students who are just checking a box in our class and in our programs, really, to a degree. These are some of my favorite circumlocutions. My student that said, couldn't remember the word / maybe I never taught it, I don't know, for older. So she just went, okay, my not young sister. There, take that. My other student on the right there that said, didn't know the word for box. So he just said, okay, fine. Cereal house. How's that for you, lady? Does that work? And he looked at me like, yeah, obviously the house of the cereal. It's like where cereal lives, like its house. Okay, thank you. Again, are we rewarding that? Yes. Or are we taking points off for not knowing box? No, absolutely not. Because what are they going to do out in real life, like out in the real world? And why are we not considering our classroom the real world and treating it as such and grading it as such? A couple more. The clothing of egg for eggshell. Amazing. And the student here was saying, she was going for, I don't like crop tops because they're not ladylike. And she used mujer gusta, literally ladylike. Awesome. These are written obviously without help of translators. These are just students writing on paper, just with their thoughts, with the best thing that they can come up with. And not gonna lie, it's awesome to see, and I'm really excited for this next year. Again, what have we learned? I love writing on paper, and I love when my students write on paper and they make lots of awesome, manipulations of the language, mistakes, but really just they make all sorts of new ways of seeing things and saying things. We cannot ignore the fact that our students are basically scientists in our laboratories of language. They are language scientists. They are experimenting. They are trying different combinations. They are exploding things. They are, swirling and seeing how things end up. They are scientists. They are language scientists, and our classrooms are language laboratories, for better or for worse, right? So these are some of those experiments, and I think they deserve to be rewarded. The one on the left here along the same lines didn't know gloves, so he just said sock of hand socks. I love it. Gloves are essentially hand socks. And in German, I'm pretty sure it's like Handschuh is how you say gloves. So nailed it. And then the one on the right there, she couldn't remember how to say day. So she just said, fine, my birthday's in 11 todays, which I think is awesome. Like, okay, that makes sense. Like, if you said to somebody like, my birthday is in 11 todays, and did some kind of like future, like loopy finger motion, they're going to understand. They know exactly what, and they're probably going to laugh. Good for you. Good for you. You got around it and you said it somehow. And I just think that I don't see anything wrong with that. And in fact, it's the opposite. I see everything right with that. But that's where we get divided sometimes as colleagues and as departments and as programs and as districts, is people arguing over what to do like with these behaviors. It's a big question. It's important. It's a one to ask ourselves. And it's one to ask each other, because it's really easy to say, of course I reward risk-taking. I just want students to communicate, and then still have those pesky rubrics that take off a point for every spelling error, or, and so on and so on. And so those are mixed messages. If we're doing that, then we really don't just want students to communicate. And we need to figure out how we can get those things to all mutually exist. The third question is, what can I actually control? So we looked at our core value, our core beliefs, like what shape how I teach and how I approach all of this and other people. What are my values? What can I actually control? I can get really excited about a number of things, but if I can't actually control it or change it or affect change, hopefully within it at some point, does it deserve my mental and emotional real estate, let alone my time? A couple of those things that we can actually control in my setting is what we weight grades, and so therefore what we count and what we value. We grade what we value and we plan what we value. So if we teach what we care about, we grade what we care about, we plan for more of what we care about. And I think we just have to admit that. In my department, this is our unit breakdown. And my department head, Melanie, is awesome and implemented this about 2 years ago, so pre-COVID. And it really, really behooved a lot of our, I don't know, what do I want to say, like decisions or collaborations or whatever during COVID. In one unit, we have one test, so one major assessment. Could be a project, could be a presentation, could be an IPA. This is across all languages and all levels. So it's both vertically within languages, within all the levels, and horizontally across all 5 of our languages. One large, 2 medium assessments, if you want to call that like a quiz or a check-in or a checkup or whatever, and then 3 smaller assessments that build towards those bigger ones. So for example, our classworks prep for the quizzes and the quizzes prep for the test so that everything is also fueled by that backward design, which was one of those core practices that you saw at the beginning, and just good pedagogical practice in general. So our 3 classworks are composed of whatever we decide. If we want it to be like a literal assignment that they're doing and redoing, like a writing that they're honing and getting feedback on and turning in like a final draft, great. If we want it to be, we do 5 assignments, Monday through Friday, and then I pick one at random that we're going to turn in for a grade, great. It can be the average of all 5 classworks from Monday through Friday, great. If there's a way to grade those effectively and, keep all those things in mind, awesome. It can be an average of, other things like a GIMKIT percentage plus your, just classwork turn in, maybe we're not looking at accuracy, whatever works for you. I'm trying to give several examples because a lot of people do it a lot of different ways because we all teach obviously in different places and with different students, and our teaching situations are as unique as a fingerprint. I mean, they are our DNA. So no one else teaches in your classroom with your students, with your colleagues, period. And then the person next door, totally different room, totally different colleagues, totally different, just everything. So whatever works for you, this is how we have streamlined it within our department. 45, 25, 10, all add up to 80. So our other 20% is, as it says off to the side there, composed of our final exams. So we give a reading and a listening final together, 10%, and we give a performance speaking and a performance writing 5% each. So that's the remaining 20%. Those are district mandates. So they can't, there's nothing we can do about that. We have, like I said, I'm in a big district of 141, soon to be 143 schools, and 174,000 students, 1 million residents. Like some of these things are just non-negotiable. So those finals and the district assessments, things like that, non-negotiable. So as much as we can't control in those ways, these are some things that we can control and feel really good about. If it feels micromanagey, again, keep in mind, I can call, and my course team can call the small, the medium, and the large whatever we want. We can make them whatever we want. If I want one of their quizzes to be a writing assignment, and maybe one of those drafts, one of those classwork assignments is the draft, great. So it's really the same assignment. We can do that. There's a lot of freedom within this structure. And it eliminates a couple of things. It eliminates students taking one language because it's easier. Oh, take Chinese. Like they never have quizzes. They never have homework. It's just tests. Or don't take Spanish. Miss White's really mean and all she gives is tests. Like we literally can't do that. My colleague and I, we can't, nobody can be that person because all of our grade books are set up the same. And it also prevents students doing a mountain of makeup work at the end of the grading period, as we know they do, and it not affecting their grade, or having all of these different assignments that now we're rifling through trying to figure out like what Jimmy can do to, do his grade. Okay, redo this one, redo this one. There is not enough of anything for that. So nothing totally like tanks their score or elevates their score unfairly. You're not going up or down really in a way that carries too much weight, just mathematically. And as long as you've got redos and retakes and all of those continued opportunities for students, there's no reason not to be able to revise any of these assignments until you've got the grade that you want, basically, especially after this past year. That's what this has taught us, is when a lot of the retakes and just automatic reattempts were possible, kids were, moving mountains, doing whatever they needed to do to be able to take advantage of those. And I'm here for that. More power to them, right? I mean, I need lots of redos in life. So, what good is there to fault them for that? Good for them. I would be more alarmed if they weren't taking advantage of retake opportunities, because that would be a little more unnerving, just feeling completely apathetic. So good for them. We give unlimited retakes, unlimited, retries, whatever. And our students find a lot of success. And therefore, we also don't have the issue of that mountain of work to do at the end of the grading period, because they've had the entire grading period to do these select amount of assignments. And they're more invested because they know that that everything's building towards a grade, and that their progress is really what's being valued. So it's not just a one-time, no corrections, nothing. And they actually do more, which feels counterintuitive, but we know isn't. So it's a really, really good system for us. This also means that knowing what's graded and like how often I'm going to grade it. So we do 3 units in a 9-week period. So every unit gets 3 weeks. So that means that like if I've got 3 small, 2 medium, 1 large, that's 6 grades total in 1 unit. If I've got 3 units, that's 18 grades. And that means I can go ahead and plug in all 18 assignments at the beginning of the grading period. So now the grade book is essentially a calendar. There is no, is this for a grade? When are we doing this? What am I going to miss next Friday? Parents and students are both equally informed all the time about what we're doing when. And again, for me, that classwork average, that one's my scenario. I take all of their classwork assignments that get some kind of score, feedback, even just completion, whatever. I take each one of those each day and average them. So I use a lot of like self-grading things, like if it's a GimKit percentage, if it's Go Formative assignment, I use Go Formative is my favorite way to do classwork. So all of those assignments, everything is plugged in, they get a little score, and then it gives me the average for the entire week. So when they say, is this for a grade? I can kind of not manipulatively say yes, because everything basically is for a grade and or prepping for some kind of performance that will also elicit a grade. So again, it's really transparent, and it takes that emotional piece out of it and that decision fatigue that says like, oh, you're only going to do it if it's for a grade, huh? Well, yeah, why would they be doing more? I'm not looking for like extra bus duty. I'm not like asking my administrator for like more jobs to do. I'm trying to get rid of jobs to do. And so were they. So we can't really blame them for prioritizing their time either. If they're like, is this for a grade? You know what? Yes. But like, tell me more about that. Like, tell me more about why you're asking. Oh, you're stressed out because you have like a chemistry test, next period, or AP calculus, or you're getting checked out, and, if you don't want to miss turning it in because your mom's coming to take you to the dentist, like there's pretty much always a reason. Sometimes it's just like feeling lazy and not wanting to do it. Relatable. But, we also have to have our reasons. And so when our reasons are more transparent, it's a little bit easier for students to buy in, or a lot easier for students to buy in. And again, everyone involved, colleagues, parents, admin, everybody appreciates being planned out and being transparent about what matters. Because again, what do we value? If we value transparency and we value the why behind the what and the how, that's going to come through in a lot of ways. This is one way. This is just one way that I do it. We've also got those CanDo statements and all of like the proficiency benchmarks that we have, again, available from ACTFul and Assessful. This particular The CanDo Statements are a collaborative effort on their part. And what's nice is they give us not only, I'm going to move myself over here and see where my finger is. They not only give us the mode, so they tell us like how they're doing it. Is it interpretive? Is it interpersonal? Or is it presentational? But then also gives us like the novice levels, the intermediate levels, and it just keeps going. It'll keep going, advanced, distinguished, superior. And what's great about this is going forward, thinking level up, not catch up. Where should our students be is not as important of a question as like, where are our students going? If we know where they're going and we know where they usually are, we can adjust our goals a little bit more appropriately. And if we're also not being completely, kind of like what's the animal that sticks its head in the sand? Like an ostrich, right? Yeah, gotta be, right? Ostrich. All of a sudden I was picturing like all of the wrong birds, like flamingos. I don't think they do that. But I'm going to Google that later, 100%. We can't just be an ostrich that's like, I teach level 1 and 2, and therefore I only need to know the novice levels. Okay, well, that's step 1. And also, what about your colleagues? If your colleagues are inheriting your students, they're going to have some expectations. And a lot of times when groups aren't collaborative, that's the elephant in the room is some people feel like they're working harder than other people. Some people feel like they're getting students who aren't ready for the level they teach. Okay. Am I right? And some people feel like that those expectations are all unreasonable. So these are the conversations that we don't have often enough, in my experience. So not only knowing where your proficiency benchmarks and where your kind of leveled appropriate expectations are, but also like the other people on the ladder. I love that Spanish is super literal, and the word for ladder is literally pass hands, pasamanos. What about all of those manos in el pasamanos? Because there are a bajillion of them, and we don't always even see them. So we can't just be on our own ladder, ignoring the top and the bottom, wherever that is. Or we can't be at the bottom and ignore the rest of the journey and just say, I just have to get them to here. Okay, well, yes, but don't forget the people looking down, trying to pull your students up the ladder, wishing they'd gotten a little bit farther, right? That's hard for me as a level 1 and 2 teacher. I'm like, but look at everything they've learned. And I love that my colleagues keep us as a level 1 and 2 team accountable by saying, yes, and good for them. We're going to need you to also incorporate X, Y, and Z. That's a good, healthy conversation. So looking at if we did that before, awesome. If that wasn't really on our radar or something that we were reflecting on before, we definitely need to now, because what's their next goal, right? We're leveling up. We're not catching up. That's just how that's going to have to go. In Georgia, we have some Georgia Department of Education proficiency targets from our world language coordinator, Patrick Wallace, who's awesome. And so these are some expectations based on language and level that we can have for our students. So once we've learned these, like novice, intermediate, et cetera, then we can look back at what the expectation is for our students in different modes by the end of a certain level. And that resource is there for you in the speaker notes as well. That also then makes it easier to use certain rubrics. This is one of my favorite rubrics. The link to purchase is in the speaker notes from Martina Becks. Not for me, it's just the best $5 I've spent in a very long time when I bought it a few years ago. These are great rubrics that speak to those proficiency levels and make sense with what you've leveled them in as. So again, like if we said, okay, our goal is at the end of level 1 is for reading, novice high, or excuse me, let me do one that's writing. Writing, novice mid. Now I know what I should make my A, maybe my high level expectation, my A or my B level for level 1. This is going to be my C or D level. And then maybe this just means like nobody fails in this particular scale. But they also are able to see the rest of the ladder as well. It's important that students can see where they're going. What's the end point? What's the goal? What the heck are we doing, right? So many students say when surveyed, it's like what? Most of them are like, I want to be fluent. But when they don't know how much time that takes and practice, and they don't know like the little steps they are to get there, they can then get out of level 1 and 2. And we perpetuate that thing of, I took 2 years and I don't know any Spanish, because maybe those goals weren't as concrete. Many people are just going to say that anyway, because they don't use the language. Why would they expect to retain it? But that's a whole separate session. We're just looking at that goal setting and having students get those realistic expectations and also chart their own progress as we chart it for them. So I love these writing rubrics and these writing forms from Martina. They have really, really helped out a lot of my formative feedback. We also have manipulated some rubrics in my department, and I solicited some feedback recently on Twitter and got some really great input on rubrics, because our rubrics are always evolving. Again, I'm on a big team, and it's really hard to get people to agree on the same thing to keep using for the same amount of time. So these are some ways that we've played with some different things with each other. That's that same Martina Beck's rubric, but vertically. And so it's got the actual performance descriptors, and we just put like a point value onto it, right? According to the leveled expectations. To the left is just one that we made in Google Drawings, and it was more of like a task sheet, really, like a points sheet. Did you do it? Did you do, what we asked you to do? Is everything, again, like level appropriate? Is everything, how much is communication impeded? Can I read and listen to what you're saying as a sympathetic listener and not trying to, police your pronunciation or your comprehensibility, but like I'm really, really trying? And how understandable is what you're producing? And also just the tasks, like, did you do kind of how we said this would get you the most credit? I jokingly put this little gift sticker in here that said, this is also just a handy little tidbit. We got to coining the use of Google Translate this past year. Translator interference was really helpful. It wasn't like accusatory. It wasn't like, I know what you did, even though we know what they did, because we had students using, the pluscuamperfect in August of Spanish 1. I don't even use the pluscuamperfect. But regardless, we ended up just starting to call it a little bit of translator interference. Not sure what this says. I mean, we know what it says, but they're like, oh, sorry, redo. So if that's helpful, just takes the edge off of, again, the accusation, but also says, I see you. Okay. And then the last question is, do we play nicely with others? Are we playing well in the sandbox? Are we sharing? Do we know ourselves, and do we know ourselves well enough to know ourselves in the context of also other people? A couple of things that have helped me with this over the years. These are 3 measures that have really helped me learn myself, and they affect sort of all levels of my personality and temperament. StrengthsFinder was really great. I did it as part of ACTFL's Lil Leadership Advocacy Program. And it tells you kind of how you work with others, what your values are, kind of your covert and your overt leadership styles, what you model in ways that you lead and ways that you follow. Enneagram test is free. So the StrengthsFinder, whichever way it is, StrengthsFinder you can buy with the book, StrengthsFinder from, I think, like Gallup. The Enneagram test is free, and there are several different ones. Some of the paid ones are also really good. And it's going to get at your core fears, your core beliefs. Also, like when you're stressed, how you behave. My God, it's so accurate. I'm a 3, and it's so accurate. It also gets at like kind of how your behavior manifests itself with other people and just with yourself, like in your own mind. Also highly accurate for me. Like I said, I am a 3. So learning that about myself helped me realize why I don't like feeling vulnerable in certain situations, why that vulnerability can turn into like embarrassment or shame, depending on the setting, depending on the person. It also helped explain why certain people give me certain like vibes when hanging out with them, or make me uncomfortable or make me comfortable. Those were like 3 or 4 negative things in a row, but they're also really positive things. It helps me pinpoint like when I feel good about myself, what allows me to feel good about myself and in my life. It's really, really interesting to get an accurate read on that and then see if those match up with how you feel. And the last one is, I think, actually intended to be like a communication in couples book, but it doesn't have to be. I did it with a group of girlfriends, and it's called I Said This, You Heard That, which feels about right. If you're in like any kind of friendship or relationship or collegial relationship, it really breaks down like how your natural temperament affects how you communicate with others. So literally, I said this, but you heard that. And it gets at kind of what Brene Brown calls like the story we tell ourselves, and why we tell ourselves those stories. So my result is half yellow, half blue, which apparently is actually a really unnatural result. and means that I was being deceptive in my answers, but I've done it again and got the same score. So for me, it explains a lot of ways, again, just like the Enneagram test, like a lot of ways that I do and don't like to feel vulnerable. A lot of ways that I feel conflicted sometimes, and also like wishy-washy. Like I feel like I'm chameleoning in situations because like I agree with that and I agree with that. And that's something that I have reflected on as far back as I can remember. You think about middle school when you felt really comfortable with all sorts of different friend groups, or maybe you felt comfortable with like none, like 0 people. And you're like, is it me? Am I like, is there something wrong with me? I think we start asking ourselves that at a really young age. And some of those things stay internalized like through adulthood. And as teachers, when we give, and sometimes we can, we and our colleagues can embody some of the characteristics of the age group that we teach. A colleague and I keep each other in check, and we're like, knock it off. Do we teach high school or are we in high school? When one of us is being kind of snarky or kind of, just snotty or judgy, because that's important to consider, right? How are we behaving as adults whose clientele really is literal children as teachers? So that's important. And me being half yellow and half blue makes so much sense. I'm going to try it again. In a couple of months, I'll just retake the test. It also comes inside the book, and we'll see what happens. But really, half green, half yellow, half blue makes so much sense, because I read those characteristics and I'm like, yes, also yes. So same thing with the Enneagram. All 3 of these really have given me so much information. And I say all of that to say, it helps me figure out how I interpret other people that I have to work with in different situations, like so much better, because I know about myself now. And I can then, if I know their certain scores or numbers on certain things, I have a colleague who we've both taken all 3 of these, and we go, oh my God, of course. Like, of course you think that. You're a 9. Like on the Enneagram test, she's a 9. Of course that. You're a 9 and you're a blue. Oh my God. Like, so you totally thought, I did not mean that at all. And we can have these really like funny, we laugh, but we have really healthy, productive, collaborative conversations. So how are we working with others, and how are we learning ourselves in terms of kind of all of those different ways? Again, do we play nicely with others? Like what's our kindergarten report card say about us as teachers? Plays well with others, plays nice in the sandbox, or maybe needs to work on that, right? One thing that also helped me kind of craft some expectations for myself and for others, we're just setting some boundaries this past year. I've always been kind of a boundaries person, or at least very cognizant of when I do and don't have them at the very least. And these are some that really I defined like tangibly this year. And I separate them into 3 different columns here. So we've got technology, workload, and emotions. These are just, and I obviously won't go through them, but these are just the things that are self-explanatory, which is why I won't go through them, because you can read. They're self-explanatory, and they really helped me like keep my mind on right somewhat this year. This year was a lot, and every year is a lot, really, when we think about it. So might as well just keep on keeping on. And, I don't know if I'm going to change any of these. I just recently looked back at them and I was like, no, yeah, that was really good. Just silly little things like a load of laundry every day, running the dishwasher, even if it only has, that day's stuff. It's just these little things that you finally acknowledge, like, oh yeah, that kind of stresses me out. Then why do I allow it to keep happening? So little things like that, within obviously the parameters of your family, the time that you have, contracted work hours, all of those kind of things. Just the general expectations on you are obviously all individual. Again, DNA, right? Fingerprint. But when I separated them into technology, workload, and emotions, they just helped me make more sense of them. So putting them in these columns was really just a reflection for me. So that might also help you kind of separate some of the areas of your life and maybe the things that feel kind of overwhelming, because I was feeling overwhelmed in different ways at different times on different days. Oh, too much, right? Too much. So I lied. I said the previous one was our last question, but really those are the kind of 4 reflection questions. And so going back, core beliefs, right? Values. Do we, wait, did I count wrong? hold on, whatever. Anyway, this is literally why I don't teach math. I'm like, I can't, who can do all that? So we've got core beliefs, values. What was the third one? How do we play nicely with others? Let's go back. Let's just check. Oh yeah, control. Okay, so I wasn't wrong. What can I actually control? Do I play nicely with others? And finally, what high leverage routines can I use? So the first four I think of as like the four because they shape my thoughts and they really guide my reflections. And then the last one is really just stuff. These are some resources. These are some high leverage routines, some high leverage habits that I have compiled over the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years, that really give me a lot of bang for my buck in terms of class size. So all of these are editable and you have access to these in, again, like the Roomies, Zoomies, where is this slideshow? And they're all linked directly on the slide. So when we're looking at what we value, what our core beliefs are and how those affect our teaching, as well as what we can control, and are we collaborating and sort of, what's the other word? I want to say like compromising, right? Collaborating and compromising with other people. What are some high leverage routines that we can use? Some of my favorites are putting, things all in one place. For example, like if we're looking to move students from, let me move up here, from like the word to the sentence to the main idea, like to the thought level and what's the next thought level. These interpretive rubrics from Anne-Marie Chase out of Nevada are awesome. And they're a really great way to formatively assess what students are getting from an audio clip, from an infographic, from a reading, from the, again, word to full sentence, full thought level. They're really nice to use regularly. Just have a bunch printed out and you can then adjust them for level. So her blog post right here at this link is really, really awesome and explains all of that. Great resource, recyclable. We use them a couple of times a week and they're just really, really great. Also from Sarah Lovelace in Kentucky a few years ago, she blew my mind and changed my life when she talked about how she uses like classmate roster questions. So eventually this sheet is in the hands of every student has a copy of this, and eventually all of their classmates' names are on the left side, and they have asked every classmate all 5 of these questions. So let's say it's an introductory, like Unit 1, Level 1. It might be, how old are you? Where are you from? Where do you live? What do you like to do? When's your birthday? I don't know. And by the end of this sheet, if they've asked all 30 plus classmates each of those 5 questions, that means they've asked and answered 150 questions. And that means that they've answered for themselves 30 times because everyone has now talked to everyone. So it forces me as a teacher to have 5 guiding questions, which match up with the CanDo statements for the unit, and have those planned out well in advance. So we've got built-in interpersonal communication with some feedback and with some classmate and environment rapport. It's just like literally positive thing, positive thing, positive thing. So they have that sheet, they write down the classmates' answers just in shorthand or whatever. And by the end of, let's say, the level, I have one of these for every unit. That's 5 or 6 questions. So let's say on the sheet's 5, but you can always make it more. That's 5 questions for every unit. We do 6 units. That's 30 questions that if they can answer those things in written or spoken form and understand when others do it in spoken or written form, that's every mode. That's 30 pieces of information minimum that they should be able to communicate. So a student who's really, really struggling, they can handle that. Your high flyers are going to go, I shouldn't say your high flyers, the students that have the circumstances and the motivation, I'm trying to get away from that kind of language because it's not helpful. But your students who are just wanting more and more language, they're going to have that and then some. But if you can narrow it down to like your super standards or your, 30 CanDo statements for level 1, well, there you go. They literally did them and with each other, and there's evidence. Now you can say, tell me about 2 classmates. And they have to talk in the third person and go, oh, well, Timmy, is 15. He's from New York, but he lives in Atlanta now. His birthday is December 4th. Now they've got all of this information compiled about each other. And we get them speaking not just about themselves, but other people. Really, the options are endless. Bethany Drew and I have collaborated for a couple years now on this sort of like warm-up cool-down sheet. And we were both inspired by the incredible Laura Sexton. So two fantastic teachers right there out of North Carolina. And we finally got it narrowed down into kind of warm-ups here and cool down here, as well as some space for questions, reflections, as well as a self-eval for like objectives, learning targets, all that kind of thing. I now do these in Go Formative, but we'll see. I may go back to the paper this year if that doesn't work out, or if the technology piece doesn't fall into place, or whatever happens. But for this year, the plan is to continue with this routine because it's been really, really great. For the warm-ups, they have 4 blanks, as you can see, and a place to put what number they've chosen. I always project 6 options, and they're not conjugating. They're not list the words. They are questions. Where are you from? How are you today? Things like that they can answer with as much context as possible. A lot of them are those guiding roster questions, repeated, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And so they get a lot of repetition with those. So she's got, there's an editable version here, and I believe I linked it, but if you look on Bethany Drew's blog, Aventuras Nuevas, New Adventures, aventurasnuevas.blogspot.com, I believe. It should be WordPress, maybe. Anyway, she'll come up. Just do Bethany Drew blog warm up in a Google search and it'll come up. If not, just email me and I'll send you the link. But really, really great. And there's the editable version. Another collaboration between Laura Sexton and Bethany Drew that I'm just along for the ride with on is putting the different I can statements into like a can do performance sort of presentational speaking. So it's sort of like that interpersonal roster, but instead of asking and answering certain things, they are going to do certain things and a classmate signs off that person could do it. So all of the directions are up here. And again, that template is here. There are about 10 total. So I usually keep 3 really simple, 3 kind of medium, and then 3 a little bit harder. And 2 classmates sign off, and then I pick a couple at random to just spot check after everyone's signed off because, they said you could do them. So let's check in. Can you do number 5? If I know that those can do statements from the unit are now here as a task, well, then we should have a really good idea of the amount of success that students will have on the unit assessment if the can do statements are incorporated because they have literally performed them, with several different colleagues or several different classmates, their colleagues. So really, really great. And again, I'll link that blog post from Bethany Drew in there as well. I believe there's one if you want more of a description. Another vocabulary kind of inspiration from Thomas Sauer, which is actually on the next slide, also came to me this past year. Actually the 2019-2020 school year, but then we ended up just going with it and taking away the paper, was instead of continuing to print those vocabulary lists, really just making students aware of like where the living vocabulary list lives in Quizlet, which is what we use, and giving them constant access through a QR code or through a link or whatever else to those. So that instead of like adding to their, we give them a paper list, of course, but with all of the anticipated vocabulary, and let's say we want to add, let's an introductory unit for like a gendered language. So we're also going to keep adding like gender, non-binary language and different pronouns and just being as inclusive as possible. The lists are starting to grow, right? Because they're all of the possibilities. Our vocabulary lists are a buffet, and students aren't going to order everything on the buffet, obviously, but they want to be able to pick and choose. So that tends to make for a lot of growing, and not everyone has the same things at the same time. So they might have missed that we added, all sort of different styles of hair or different textures or whatever. And so I'm thinking of ways that our lists have grown over the years. So instead, just giving them like a template that reminds them for the unit when the due dates are, here's where the vocabulary is. And also like, here are some ways you can level up this unit, kind of just like a overall template for the unit, kind of like like a welcome sheet instead of just a vocabulary sheet and maybe nothing else. So also again, free template. It was a good resource for our students. Again, we might just do it digitally this year, but things to consider, right? Things to consider. That vocabulary inspiration came from Thomas Sauer's resource here that has students break down the language they'll need to produce as opposed to, or along with, understand and maybe just some fun extras. If I have a student who, now has like her hair in braids and she didn't catch that on the vocabulary, or we're in the appearance unit and she's like, oh, I just got my hair braided. How do you say that? Oh, okay, cool. She's going to want to use that to produce. But like my hair is too short. So like I won't be saying that to describe myself, but she will, or he will. Different examples like that might be, all of that unique language that we know. Like I will never say, I have a sister. That's not a sentence that I will never say the sentence, my sister is, and talking about myself. My parents are almost 80. The jig is up. Like that's just not, it's just not in the cards. There is certain language that some of us won't use. I will never say my eyes are brown. They're not. So things like that, thinking about what students need to understand versus what they need to produce, reconceptualizes sometimes how a lot of us were taught to teach, which is every student must know every word, and we have a long vocab quiz and 1 point off for spelling. Oh my God, that's so stressful. And I feel like frustrating for all involved in my experience. I did not like teaching that way. My students did not like learning that way. And frankly, I don't know that they did learn that way. They just memorized a lot of content and regurgitated it on an assessment and moved on and didn't really get a lot from our experience together, to be honest. So I love this language guide as sort of a meta awareness tool for students to ask about like words that they may need to know. So now they're really reflecting on vocabulary and language use. Also differentiating between maybe what they need to produce and what they need to understand and the overlap therein. So just getting students to separate some of their vocabulary and grow their vocabulary in a custom way. And this is a really, really great tool for that. And so that link goes right to that document. And it's just blank, obviously, with all of these resources being attributed to the owners, of course. And next to lastly is this Martina Beck's rubric that I mentioned. So she's got extensive directions at this link. Best $5 I've spent in a long time. She is not aware that I'm even saying this, I'm sure, but like it really is one of the best resources I've ever had in my teaching career. There are lots of different options for the different forms. This is just one example, and they're not language or level specific. So check it out. She's got a whole explanation and lots of inspirational ideas at the beginning when you purchase the document. And then the last thing, especially this year, if we're looking at leveling up versus catching up, is what kind of options are we giving students? This is one way that we've started to incorporate different options for them to choose from in their writing and in their speaking. So this is like a daily routine unit. Oh my goodness. It's like so hard to make relevant, but we're doing our best. And so option A really is just kind of the low hanging fruit. And I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way. I just mean this is really doable, right? A few actions from your morning, a few actions from your afternoon and night, maybe a little commentary on like how often, why you do things, and then call it a day. Option B is a little bit harder. So is there anything they want to do, in the new year? Because we start level 2. This is level 2 unit 1. We start level 2 in January. So for changing for like the new year, is there anything you want to do in the new year, since it's January, to, just improve yourself or be like a better version of yourself? A lot of times those are things we do in our daily routine. So that's option B. I want to exercise more. I want to study more. Those are changes in our habits. And then option C is that super level up option that is going to get students to take a lot of risks and really like get them expressing some thoughts that they just have as humans. They're new to the language. They're not new to thinking. And so they're not novice thinkers. They might just be novice Spanish, users or French users or Arabic users. So asking if our school district should start later than it starts at 7, because we go like basically 7 to 2, and using the routines and schedules to inform their argument. So we're getting a little bit higher level skill task as well. Don't just tell me, but persuade me, and do so in Spanish. And you can do a couple of these. Some students will say, "Can I blend a couple?" Yeah, of course. Right? We want quantity and we want quality. Just tell me. Just keep going. Tell me what you think. Right? Lastly, I've got here some of my goals before we wrap this up. These are some different goals that I have taken and my colleagues have taken. I'm trying to get my face out of the way again, over the years. So these are just 8 different goals that we did like 1 or 2 at a time, like for a whole year, that really helped us get into the headspace of these resources, these reflections, all of these different things. So if it's that I can performance sheet, that you want to make for like unit 1, just to try out your first unit, or unit 2, because you want to get your head on, as the school year starts, maybe even just looking at that spreadsheet that Georgia has, and deciding what the proficiency level expectations are for your and your colleagues' different levels. That can be really liberating. That way you don't have to feel like in level 2, you have to hit like every tense that has ever existed, like a lot of level 2 classes do, when you realize tense isn't even mentioned until like advanced low, which is what many teachers test at. So when we're looking, full disclosure, full honesty, and if our expectations are level appropriate, that can be a really great starting point. Looking at kind of a feedback schedule. If you want to give more feedback, just map it out. Decide, what your different quizzes or tests are going to be, like what mode. Maybe all your quizzes will be interpretive and then your tests will be performance, and they'll get feedback on, all of the above, but in different ways. Can you consolidate your vocabulary? Can you create that interpersonal roster, maybe one for each unit, and then just try it out? And that's it. That's your one goal. I linked here the ways that we incorporate the different modes every day as sort of an everyday IPA, which is basically in, then together, and then out, all within the same lesson plan. Or is there a way that we can analyze, our weekly routines, daily routines, be it our goals, be it something we want to do, like with those rosters, with those I can performance tasks, just something that has now a template, and now we have a go-to thing that we can do that we know is coming up on every Friday or Monday or Wednesday. It's something that just takes, again, the pressure off of us to be new and innovative all the time, and also gives us a lot of bang for our buck and works towards really valuing what students are doing with language, not what they're missing, which a lot of legacy practices, unfortunately, take points off for, right? Kind of reshaping why they're called the CanDo statements in our head and not the haven't learned yet statements. That's mostly what a lot of our rubrics and things do, is like, ooh, you don't know this yet, instead of, hey, look at what you did. And that's what a lot of proficiency-based teaching does and should do. And lastly, I even just one year, a goal was really just to make Pinterest boards for every unit and start collecting lots of authentic resources. That was it. That was the goal. We didn't even have an idea for how to use them yet, because we were all just, still new to working with each other, but that was the goal. And now we have that. We have that for levels 1 and 2, Pinterest boards for authentic resources and ways to use them, like those interpretive rubrics from Anne Marie Chase, if you go back a few slides. So there are lots of different things we can do. But again, we picked out one of these goals per year, and really had to internalize that teaching language is always changing. Language is always evolving. We're always evolving as people. Nothing's ever going to stay the same. We're never going to have the same school year 2 years in a row. Like, whew, finally I made it. I can calm down. It's just not going to be like that. And especially now, as we look after 2020, 2021, we're going to have to look at ourselves leveling up and not catching up and being really easy on ourselves. But again, like I put here, like Myra says, remembering that we put the we in world language, and we cannot forget that even if we want to be, as much as we want to be, we are never alone in what we're doing. And students are affected, colleagues are affected, people in other departments that we might not even realize are, watching us are affected. It's just what we do has a lot of spotlight moments. And when we really reflect on our values and our core beliefs, what is within our sphere of control, what it is that we want to get out of what we're doing every single day, our work is too hard not to reflect on that. And I have found that it becomes easier and simpler and 100% more enjoyable when I have been able to do so. So I hope that these resources have been helpful. I hope that our 78 minutes together has not been too much, and that you can come back to this video and use it as you see appropriate and accordingly. And please let me know if you need any more explanation or any resources on anything shared here. My email address is on my website at the first slide. In the first slide in the speaker notes is where my website is, and you can contact me anytime. So remember, we're in this together. So hang in there, do your best, but don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Thanks.